The original Xbox came out in 2001, and up until that point, it was the most powerful home console we had ever seen. Now Xbox isn't necessarily known for its exclusives, but back in the day, there were a ton of exclusive games that you could only play on the original Xbox. So today, let's talk about the top 20 couch co-op Xbox games. And like I mentioned, all the games that we're covering today are exclusive to the Xbox or at least have some kind of exclusive co-op feature. Now that that's out of the way, the first game I want to talk about is called Magi Death Fight. This game came out in 2002 exclusively in Japan, so it's a game that a lot of people probably missed out on. It's a top-down action game, and visually it's pretty simple. It kind of looks like a Bomberman type of game, and you're able to play through the campaign in 2-player co-op. The concept is really simple. Every level takes place in an arena. You want to go grab the colorful balls of magic energy and throw them against your enemies. This is your only form of attack, and by holding down the fire button, you can control how far the ball will shoot. The ball doesn't do any damage until it stops, so this will require some timing. The game is very simple, and it looks pretty basic, but the gameplay is pretty solid, and quickly becomes addicting. This one's definitely a hidden gem worth seeking out. If you got an Xbox console in the early days, you're probably familiar with the original Nightcaster, as it was an early release. But this one's pretty different. This one is a top-down action RPG, kind of similar to a Gauntlet type of game. And this game did not get favorable reviews back in the day, but playing it today, I think it actually holds up pretty well. Graphically, it's not anything special, but I found the gameplay to be solid. And you could play it with a friend in 2-player co-op. The main thing that sets it apart from other dungeon crawler type of games is the control scheme is pretty unique. It implements a dual analog stick control scheme, where the left stick moves your character and then the right stick you control a little cursor, and this is where you will shoot your spells. And there are 4 elements that you can take control of: fire and water, and dark and light. So mixing this up between the 2 players definitely adds some variety to the gameplay. And of course you do have close combat attacks as well. If you skipped over this game back in the day because of the reviews, maybe give it another shot now. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon 2 Summit Strike. This is an add-on to Ghost Recon 2, but it was exclusive to the original Xbox. The main reason why I wanted to include it is this one has 4-player local co-op. So you could actually play through the campaign with 4 players split screen, which is definitely a rarity for first-person shooters, especially for this time. Now, I can't say much about Ghost Recon games. This is definitely outside of my area of expertise, so I don't know how this one compares to others, but I did enjoy playing this co-op. And there are also some standalone co-op modes that you can try as well. These games are really cheap, so if you ever do find it out in the wild at a pawn shop or thrift store, it's probably going to be just a few bucks. Now let's talk about Blackstone. This is another action RPG dungeon crawler, and this one could be played with up to 4 players. What can I say? This one is pretty similar to Gauntlet, not as good. There's areas that are a little bit rough around the edges, to be honest, but where it stands out is in the co-op gameplay. There are 5 character classes. Like most RPGs, each character and class has their own unique strengths and abilities, and you play through 26 levels. So this one isn't quite as in-depth as Gauntlet Legends or Dark Legacy, or one of those types of games. Again, this is another one that didn't get great reviews back in the day. I'd say the main negative is that a lot of the level design just kind of looks the same. Nothing really stands out. I've played so many dungeon crawlers over the years, and there's just a lot of them that aren't great. So going back to this one, I do think it's better than people originally thought, and it is an exclusive on original Xbox. Now for the second Tom Clancy game on the list, let's talk about Rainbow Six 3 Black Arrow. So this is an add-on to Rainbow Six 3, and the console version of Rainbow Six 3 is pretty different from the PC version, but we're just talking about this standalone Black Arrow, which is exclusive to the original Xbox. Again, I'm not an expert when it comes to Rainbow Six games, so I don't really know how this compares to some of the others. I haven't played a lot of them. But the game offers 2 cooperative modes. There's a practice mission, where you can play the single-player missions with a friend, and then there's Terrorist Hunt, where you hunt down the terrorists with your teammate. And both these modes can be played in split-screen co-op. I really enjoyed the Terrorist Hunt mode. To me, that's the standout feature of this game. And this is another one that's pretty common, and you should be able to find it for pretty cheap. Stubbs the Zombie. This one is a really interesting third-person action type of game, where you and a friend play in split screen, each controlling a zombie. You go around and you just fight all the humans, slowly converting them into zombies. This game implements just a lot of humor, and it's just a lighthearted experience. This one was also released on the PC back in the day, and it recently got a re-release that came out on modern platforms. But the Xbox was the only home console that it came out on back in 2005. The gameplay really isn't deep here, but it doesn't need to be. It's just fun to go around and eat brains. Blinx 2: Masters of Time and Space. This one came out in 2004, and it's the sequel to Blinx the Time Sweeper. This is a 3D platformer where you can play in split-screen co-op. And the main gimmick here is that you control time. In order to fight the enemies, you're gonna use your vacuum to suck up various objects and shoot them out at your enemies. The main benefit over the original one is the addition of 2-player co-op gameplay, which is kind of a rarity when it comes to 3D platformers, so that's the main thing that made me interested in playing this one. In this one, you don't only play as time sweepers, you're also able to play as the tom-toms. So the gameplay changes up quite a bit. Often you will be pausing time to be able to get through various obstacles. This one's definitely unique. Deathrow is an extreme sports game. It's kind of a mix between a 3D beat 'em up and hockey or basketball. You have this disc and you have to throw it at the goal. You're able to win your match by knocking out all of your opponents or by gaining more points. I typically hate sports games, and I just don't like sports in general. But every once in a while you get something that is outside of the norm and turns sports more into an actual video game and not just a simulation. Deathrow is one of those games. Like I said, it plays like a 3D beat 'em up. You're gonna run around and you're just gonna beat the shit out of your opponents. The combat might take a little bit of getting used to at first, but it works really well. The game is incredibly fast-paced and chaotic. There's a campaign mode that you could play in 4-player split-screen co-op. So 4 of you can all team up against another team. And another cool thing is that each member in your team has separate stats. And as you advance, you're able to upgrade your character's stats, which will make them faster, stronger, and just better at fighting. This is also in the era where Microsoft was really trying to be edgy. And that really comes across here with some of the characters and just the taunts that the characters use.
Kitty. I whoop a can of whoop ass for you.
It's actually just funny. Anyways, I don't often like talking about sports games at all, so that alone should tell you how good Deathrow is. Dungeons & Dragons Heroes is a hack and slash action RPG dungeon crawler. This is another one, very similar to Gauntlet, and you can play it with up to 4 players. There are 4 playable characters. You got a dwarf cleric, an elf wizard, a halfling rogue, and a human fighter. And players are able to join or quit the game at any time. Much like most games in this genre, you're able to level up and upgrade your character's stats. This one came out in 2003, and even though I knew this game existed, I didn't even play it until recently. And this is one of the few dungeon crawlers that I think really does rival Gauntlet Legends. Gauntlet Legends was one of my favorite co-op games back in the day. I played it 4 players on the N64 all the time when I was a kid. Dungeons & Dragons Heroes is one of the few games that I think really rivals that one. Toejam and Earl 3 is a reboot of the Toejam and Earl series. Now it's in a 3D environment and they added a bunch of platforming. It kind of takes a little bit from both of the original games. It has the exploration from the first game, but it has more of the combat side of the second game. As you go through the levels, you power up and you learn Funk Fu, which you will be using against the Earthlings to funkify them and convert them, I guess. It's all very silly. Ultimately, I did really enjoy this game, and I played it when it first came out. Just being a fan of the original game, it's just one of my favorite co-op games of all time, I was very excited for this one to come out. So I played through it multiple times back in the day. It's not the best in the series, but I do think it's a solid game. Although I wish that they would have just left out the voice acting. I don't think that adds anything to the experience. Oh yeah, and you can also play as Letitia now. So now there are 3 playable characters. Pariah is a first-person shooter developed by Digital Extremes. This one was released in 2005, came out on the PC, but the Xbox was the only home console that it was released on. Apparently there was going to be a PS2 version, but it was canceled. This one came out clearly to try to compete with Halo. and it doesn't really compare to Halo's gameplay, but that doesn't mean it's not a solid first-person shooter. The game takes place in a kind of post-apocalyptic world. There's a threat known as the Shroud that's going around and destroying mankind. One of the standout features is that you can collect weapon energy cores, and then you can use them to upgrade the player's weapons. So then each weapon can have new features and increased power, and each weapon in the game can be upgraded up to 3 times. The main thing is it's a first-person shooter with a story that you could play all the way through in split-screen co-op. That's why I want to recommend it. Hunter the Reckoning Redeemer. This is another dungeon crawler type of game, but this one is in a horror setting. So you're gonna fight zombies, vampires, and other various monsters. I had a lot of experience with the original Hunter the Reckoning. I played it a bunch with my sister and my brother, and we even brought my dad into the experience because we needed a 4th player. And that kind of backfired on us because for some reason we moved on, we stopped playing this game, but then my dad became obsessed with Hunter the Reckoning, and he just kept playing this over and over by himself. So that was interesting. But Hunter the Reckoning Redeemer, I didn't play nearly as much. I did have it back in the day, but I was kind of just over Hunter the Reckoning because my dad kind of just ruined it for me. This one is a really good game, and it might be the best in the series. This one came out exclusively for the Xbox. The main thing in the story is that you get to play as Kaylee, who was the little girl that you had to protect in one of the escort missions in the first game. Now she's all grown up and badass and stuff. Anyway, this game is really great, and even better with 4 players. House of the Dead 3 is a light gun shooter made by Sega. This came out originally in the arcades, but the Xbox is the only home console that the game was ported to. If you know the House of the Dead games, this one's not anything different. It has the same campy story and voice acting, which is definitely a highlight for the games, but the main focus is just the gameplay. These have always been some of the best light gun shooters ever, and being able to play this on your old CRT back in the day was a really cool experience. It is really like playing in the arcades on your couch. And this is just a really great port of the arcade original. I love all the House of the Dead games. I don't know if this one's the best, it's still definitely worth trying. The next game I want to talk about is Razes Hell. This is kind of like a third-person shooter, but it starts off with a really cute setting, but it quickly becomes violent. So if you're familiar with games like Conker's Bad Fur Day, it's definitely that same kind of vibe. They're really mixing the cutie stuff with some edgy swearing and violence, so that's the vibe they're going for here. But if you're not interested in the story or any of that stuff, just play it because the gameplay is really solid, and you can play through the whole story in split-screen co-op. You play as the main character, Raze. You're gonna go around and fight all the cute little coolets, I think is what they're called. Your main weapon is a wrist blade. You're also able to roll, kind of like Metroid. The game is incredibly violent and bloody. Every time you kill one of the enemies, they will explode and chunks of body parts will fly everywhere. And then you're able to suck them up and restore your health. Anyway, this is one that I found at Goodwill for a couple bucks and I just never played it. Didn't seem that interesting to me, but when I finally booted it up, it's actually a really solid co-op game. So don't sleep on Razes Hell. I would say this one's definitely a hidden gem. Xyanide is a shoot 'em up. This is another one that I think went under a lot of people's radar. The main gimmick here is that it is twin stick controls. So you will use the left stick to fly around and the right stick to aim and shoot. What I love about this game is the environment is always changing, as well as the angle in which you're flying. Sometimes the camera moves from behind you, sometimes you're flying vertically, and sometimes horizontally. So things are always changing, and it's always just keeping you on your toes. When it comes to shoot 'em ups, Xyanide is definitely a hidden gem. The next game I want to talk about is Spikeout Battle Street. It's a 3D beat 'em up by Sega, and you can play through the whole thing in 4-player co-op. This one really feels like a Sega arcade game, and it would have been right at home on the Dreamcast. I think most 3D beat 'em ups just don't really work. Typically there are camera issues, there's problems with the combat not feeling quite satisfying, but this one is one of the best I've ever played. First of all, the ability to play it in split screen makes it a lot easier to navigate with multiple players. You're never stuck to the same screen, so you can split up and take on enemies separately or get together and team up. You're also able to move around freely in a complete 3D environment. There's not much as far as story goes, but it doesn't matter. It's a beat 'em up. You pretty much just take on all the enemies, and then you move forward to the next group of enemies. Then you have to break the gate. I don't know why he has to say it every time, but it is what it is. You're also able to play this game in a system link. So if you have 4 Xboxes and 4 copies of the game, as well as 4 TVs, you could have a really cool LAN party. I've never done this, but I want to at some point. Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Now this is not an exclusive to the Xbox, but the co-op mode is exclusive, and you can play through the entire story in split-screen co-op. So that's the main reason why I wanted to include this game. Each level you're gonna have various missions. Sometimes you have to assassinate someone, sometimes you have to retrieve an item. The game is in a World War II setting, going against German soldiers. The second player plays as Agent 1, so it alters the story in which he was never killed and is able to play out the missions to the end. So it is cool that you each have your own playable character. It ends up being a fully equal co-op experience for both players. And that's the main reason why I wanted to talk about this one. Brute Force. This is a third-person shooter that can be played with up to 4 players in split-screen co-op. And each character has their own unique abilities. You can approach your enemies in various ways. Stealth, or you can use snipers, or just direct attacks. Tex and Brutus are suited more for direct assaults. Hawk is better with stealth, and Flint is better at sniping enemies. When playing in single player, you can switch between the characters on the fly. But when you play in 4-player co-op, you're able to split up the characters between the 4 of you, which can lead to some really great co-op gameplay that will involve a lot of communication and teamwork. This is one that I definitely just ignored. I remember when it first came out, but for some reason it didn't really catch my attention. But going back to it after all these years, it's a really solid third-person shooter. And in some way, it kind of feels like a predecessor to Gears of War. Now let's talk about Serious Sam. So this version of Serious Sam on the original Xbox takes the first 2 Serious Sam games, the first encounter and the second encounter, and mixes them into a single experience. And like all the other games on this list, you could play through the whole story in split-screen co-op. And this is one where I feel like co-op was its main focus as opposed to deathmatch. Serious Sam seems to be a game that was released to compete with Duke Nukem. It has that same super macho man type of vibe with catchphrases and, hyper masculinity bull. This is an excellent first-person shooter. Really one of the best co-op first-person shooters I've ever played. There's just a lot of variety in weapons, and the enemies are always changing up. It just keeps the game really interesting. If I had to pick one Serious Sam game to recommend, it would be this one. Okay, now as an honorable mention, I wanted to talk about Doom 3. The only reason I'm not including this on the main list is because it doesn't have any local co-op option. You could play through the whole story mode in co-op, but it was only online. And the online servers have been down, so that's not really an option. But luckily, there was a system link option as well. So if you had 2 copies of the game, 2 Xboxes, and 2 TVs, you and a friend could team up in the same area and play through the whole story in co-op. And that's what we did here. And another bonus is this game is backwards compatible, so you're able to play it on an Xbox One or an Xbox 360, and system link it with any Xbox console. We did this on an original Xbox, which is the footage you see on the left, and a 360, which is the footage you see on the right in widescreen, and it works seamlessly. This one definitely leans heavily into horror elements as opposed to the other games. The other games definitely had some horror themed things, but this one was the first one that had like a horror atmosphere. This one actually felt scary at times. Some of the areas are really dark, so it works really well to have one player on flashlight duty so you can actually see what's going on while the other one takes out the enemies. And unlike its predecessors, this one is story driven, but the core ideas of Doom are still intact. You just destroy a bunch of enemies and move through the levels. And to this day, the original Xbox version is the only one that had the co-op mode. But there are some mods now that allow you to do this on the PC version. Anyways, if you're able to pull this off and play it in co-op by any means, give it a try. This is my personal favorite Doom game. Okay, now number 1. It should come as no surprise, I'm talking about the Halo games. Yes, I'm gonna just go ahead and include Halo 1 and Halo 2. I couldn't pick one, and they're definitely both worth talking about. Both of these games are now primarily known as competitive experiences. And rightfully so. I spent countless hours getting together with friends in 4-player split screen modes, where we would just spend a whole night killing each other. And then that gradually grew to LAN parties, where each friend would bring their own Xbox and their own TV, and we'd get up to 16 players together. That was just a crazy experience. And this is something I still do with a group of friends every once in a while. I used to be really great at these games, and I have found that I've lost my touch. I suck when playing competitively against my friends. But to me, my favorite part of the Halo series has always been the campaign mode, which has, for the most part, consistently included couch co-op gameplay. The original Halo came out in 2001, and it was a launch game for the original Xbox. This is one that I have so many memories associated with. I used to have a membership to Xbox Magazine, and I remember getting a demo for Halo. And it was just one level, but I'd play that level over and over again. So finally when I got the full game, and I played through the first few levels and then got to that one level that I played over and over in the demo, I was able to just speed run it with my friend. That was just a really fun, satisfying experience. And then once Halo 2 came out, it kind of just took its place, and I never really went back to Halo 1. It kind of just took everything that the original game did and improved upon it. And then you also had new weapons and vehicles. I loved getting into the Banshee and flying around. I also loved using the plasma sword, which was my go-to weapon back in the day. And to this day, when it comes to first-person co-op games, I think this is one of the best experiences I've ever had. The story just had so much depth. We have some of those darker levels with flashlights. It just added a lot of variety, atmosphere, and tension to the game. Halo 2 is still one of the best first-person shooters of all time. And both of these games are just some of the best co-op first-person shooters that you will ever find. I can't say enough about them. I'm not saying anything new that anyone else hasn't said before. You all know these games, and that's for good reason. They're just really great co-op games. So there you have it, 20 couch co-op Xbox games, and 1 System Link game. Are there any co-op Xbox exclusives that I missed in this list? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out our top 10 co-op Dreamcast games video. And thanks for watching.